I'm Kelvin Newman. I've got a couple of different jobs. I work as strategy director for a digital marketing agency called Visibility, who do SEO, pay-per-click, social media, analytics. But I also organise BrightonSEO, which is kind of a biannual SEO conference that takes place very surprisingly in Brighton, and yeah, it's kind of attended by 1,500, 1,600 people and sells out in about an hour or so, which is a bit crazy. Part of the reason I love SEO is because I'm kind of one of those people who thought I'm not like a very technical person. I'm not like so I was always, at school I was good at science, but I was good at arty subjects as well. And what I quite like about SEO is it's one of the relatively few jobs out there where being between those two is considered a good thing. In most jobs today, everyone should be very technical or very creative, and someone who can do a bit of both seems to go very well in SEO. And having lived in Brighton, there's like more SEO companies here than I think any other city in the world. And I think like 1 in 10 people in Brighton works for an SEO company. It's probably a bit over the top, but 1 in 10 people I meet seem to work for an SEO company. But yeah, it's a good career to have. The first thing you've got to do is try and understand, what of the big obvious things that could have gone wrong, that are very common issues, have they, it's like a standard like 20-point checklist where you're looking at things like the number of times where I've looked at websites that haven't been indexed, or at least not indexed in Yahoo or Yahoo or Bing. So I'm always kind of looking at that, and then there's a lot you can do just by sorting the home page out. I think like in too many SEO projects it can be very complex, but for like most small SMEs, they just get their home page absolutely right. They'll be in a pretty strong position because that's where all their links are already pointing, and that's where like all the attention's going to be. So yeah, I'd kind of do some basic keyword research, try and get that home page right, and kind of introduce them to the idea of link building. Not necessarily doing anything different, but at least appreciating that people talking about them and referencing them online is a good thing, because then when they do things that are occurring naturally, just in their like general marketing, they're able to extract a little bit of SEO value from that. And in a lot of sectors, that's what you need to get fairly competitive. Okay. The ideal situation is where you're working on a campaign where you know exactly what the sale was, so like you're an Amazon, you're an e-commerce, and you know that person put their credit card details in and paid you 35 quid. They're the ideal situation. You just track that back all the way through. I've worked on a lot of like job boards and professional services websites where it's kind of more lead gen, right? It's about generating some contact details that can then be followed up over the phone, or they then apply for a job. In that case, they've got to understand what that costs, and it's not everybody knows that. But it's a relatively good process to go through. If you say, okay, well, how much do you spend on offline advertising, and how many leads do you get from that? And just do simple division and go, okay, well, in your, you're paying to exhibit, exhibiting a show like Brighton SEO. How many leads did you get from that? You got what it cost, you got what the leads were. You divide the two, and that gives you a starting point for how SEO is doing. And then SEO's got to be as effective, or hopefully more effective, so it justifies the same. Because there's not many businesses where, most businesses, their budget is unlimited if they know the returns there. And if you can kind of prove that, it's a good place to start. Not always that simple though.
If it was,
it'd be a lot easier.
Exactly, of course it would.
So my first job wasn't in SEO. I've been at Visibility now for my 6th anniversary is coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. And prior to that, I used to work for a company called, at the time, EMAP, who are now known as Bauer. I used to work for Zoo Magazine, FHM, Mojo, Kerrang, all that stuff. And I kind of fell into SEO because I was working for a magazine company like 6 or 7 years ago. No one wanted to write for their website, so I volunteered. Because basically I wrote their gadget column and I got a load of gadgets for free and kind of came across SEO. And so my path was kind of relatively lucky. I joined a company that were 3 people when I joined. There's now 30 odd of us.
Wow.
So that went well. But for most people who are kind of working in, my general advice to people who are kind of looking to get into a career in anything is try and have some kind of experience. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to do work experience, though that can be good. But generally have some examples of some things you've done that are relevant to that sector. And it's just about that kind of appreciating, not going, okay, in this part here is everything I've ever done. Here's the job description, and before you go into any job interview, any initial conversation, you've got to go take that CV, take that job description, and draw the connections between the two. Because you've probably already got it, right? That's why you've applied for the job. But a lot of the process of interviewing is all about kind of making it really clear to the person who you're talking to about it. That's the case. If you've not got much experience, it's just about how can you get that. And that doesn't have to be going and working for a company for free. It means if you want to work in SEO, do you have your own blog? Have you read, SEO blogs? Have you, watched some videos? I mean, a question I always like to ask, regardless of where we're interviewing someone, is what their favourite website is. And you can tell a lot about someone by what their favourite website is, and ask them what's their favourite marketing website as well. But if they struggle to answer those questions, I'm concerned, because that information's there, it's free, and if they're not taking advantage of that, they perhaps don't have the passion and drive to really progress as quickly as they can. I think those of us who are in the SEO profession like to make Penguin out to be a bigger change than perhaps it really was. That's only because we're so invested in it. So for us, a slight change in how things are, perceived is a big deal to us, right? But for most people, it's all still the same stuff, right? So the usual good SEO link building advice is just build great content. That's not enough, right? In my opinion, that's simply not enough to do well. What you've got to do is understand who's linking to you already, understand who's linking to your competitors already, and understand why. And why they're linked to it. It might be content driven, it might not be. It might be relationship driven, it might be completely unconnected. It's due to co-ownership. But until you understand why people are already linking to you, why people are already linking to your competitors, you can't do any really successful link building. Once you've done that, learn from that. And you don't want to replicate everything everyone else has done previously, but you'd be mad starting from scratch if you can't already learn a huge amount about that. And there's some great tools out there to help you with that.
Okay, you mentioned content there. Do you think there's still a place in social media and content marketing for outsourcing?
Outsourcing is about as wide as it can get, right? So you can outsource to someone who you're paying, $5 an hour to, or you can outsource to someone who you're paying, thousands of pounds an hour to, all the big management consultants, McKinsey and all those types of people, Accenture, that's outsourcing, right, fundamentally at the end of the day. Now, outsourcing requires a different approach to internal teams, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So BrightonSEO as a conference effectively has one employee, which is me. But we're able to run it because I have a contractor who is our event manager. I have a contractor who's my virtual assistant. I have various interns who come in and get paid for a couple of weeks to work for us, right? And the way it works really well because, for them, it's not sometimes what happens sometimes when people are recruiting, they have 5 or 6 different jobs, which equates to one full-time salary, and they go, bung it all together, we'll find one person, and they're not going to do all of those things very well. Whereas my logic is sometimes it's better to go, how can I get someone who's amazingly good at dealing with venues and sorting out lighting and sorting out projection and sorting out, dealing with venues. Yeah, I've got him and he's going to work for me 2 days a month. I've got someone else who is incredibly good at admin and research and organising how many hotels we've got for speakers. She does that and she charges by the half hour. And maybe I'm a bit funny on that. I think there's a good argument for having a lot of people in one room at one time working together on a project. But actually sometimes you're better off just getting specialists to do specialist work. Well, it's a slightly peculiar one. So this is effectively the 6th Brighton SEO. But there are actually 2 Brighton SEOs before that that kind of had the name and the moniker, but weren't quite the same thing. So the first of those was actually it's a London event called London SEO, which normally kind of meets up after SMX or SES. And this, probably about 5 years ago, they all came down to Brighton for one night and got drunk, essentially. So that was kind of effectively the first one, and that's kind of almost, it wasn't pre-Twitter, but it was relatively early on in that process. And to be honest, it was about, 10 or 15 people went to that. Then following that a couple of years, they've been toing and froing on kind of, we ought to do that again, we ought to do that again. And a guy called Jamit Durrani, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he had a terrible accident, who used to work for Fresh Egg and had recently moved up to OMD in London. And he arranged a pub meetup. And at that point I kind of kicked myself into gear that I've been talking about this for a long, long time and never actually did it. So we had our first Brighton SEO, which was a meetup in a pub. It was a Friday afternoon. I didn't have a projector until 10 minutes beforehand. I didn't have a screen. We had like those kind of like flip charts. We had one of them, and it was on a chair. And it was wonky, and all technical. So like really, I mean, so some photos went around of the second Brighton SEO this week, and it looks embarrassing. You should have been at the first one. It was like absolutely absurd. But we had room for about like 15, 20 people, and like 40 people turned up. And someone turned up, talked about his new business that was selling links in newspapers. Someone videoed that, and that got featured in The Guardian. And we were just like a bunch of people in a room chatting about stuff. And so essentially it's kind of spiraled out of control from there. So we've kind of effectively doubled in size. So we went from 40 to 100 to 270 to 570. Our last one was 1,000, and we had like 1,900 people registered for this event, which not everyone turns up as a free event. We can get about 1,500 people, which it's not an audited number like you have to do when you're making these claims, but we think it probably makes us very nearly the biggest SEO conference in the UK, which is, for us, no, is the short answer, but it's a combination of everyone loving it and it doing really well. So like they sell out really quick, so that's always a sign that we ought to be doing more. And my rampant ego is a big part of it as well. That like I want to try and do bigger and better things every time, and I'm essentially a show off. So it's that's a big part of it.
I like it. Yeah.
I mean, it's tricky because there's different things that you like about different ones. I mean, what was particularly pleasing about this was it was the first time we did a 2-day event last time. It's all still about the main conference on the Friday, but the Thursday this time, which we had paid workshops and some invite-only roundtables, was really, really successful. And like in the long-term sustainability of a free SEO conference, we can't just rely on our lovely, lovely sponsors to do a really, really good job, but there's only so much that we can kind of, ask them for. So to have some other revenue streams from that's really reassuring. But I mean, probably today when we'd already had like what looked like about 400 or 500 people in already, and I went outside and we're queuing past this huge venue we've got round the corner, and there's people on the street walking past going, what's going on? To me, that's part of me goes, it'd be great if no one had to queue, right? Because you don't want anyone to have to queue up and stuff. But to kind of see all those people there to, attend something that you've had a part in making happen, it's kind of, it's quite pride and, well, it makes me feel like quite chuffed to do that, yeah.
And are there any plans for the next event?
Well, we're still on our April-September rotation, so we'll be back again in April. We've got our dates, but we've not gone public with them yet because we've not signed contracts, and I've made that mistake before. I've gone public with dates when I've not signed a bit of paperwork and it's gone wrong. I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to sit down after this one, have a chat with the sponsors, have a chat with the attendees, and try and work out what worked well and what we can do more of. I mean, I want it to be bigger. I think we're probably going to stay in the same venue and try and ram it because it was, there's a few seats in there today, and I think we can get a few more in. We're going to look at is there potential for second tracks maybe, and also we're trying to do stuff as well. So it's a big group of people, but what can we do to get people to talk to the right people, right? So like I'm here, and I would find it incredibly useful to talk to other heads. I'm not a head of SEO, but like a couple of years ago when I was effectively doing that role for SV. Wouldn't it be amazing if I could meet other people who work for 30 people agencies, those sort of like 15 to 40 people agencies who are managing those teams, perhaps not a manager, but managing SEO teams for the first time, and talk to them. Or if I work in travel SEO, to meet all the other heads of SEOs in travel companies. Or if I'm, at a tool company that is all about, as a sponsor, someone who kind of is really interested in analysis, wouldn't they love to meet all the analytics managers from all the SEO agencies and just try and work out what I can do to help those natural sort of relationships happen. I have a terrible voice, but I also have a terrible ego. So we've kind of got those two in sort of conflict with each other. I'm hoping Dom Hodgson, who runs the Amazing Think Biz conference, we've talked about a duet. We've talked about doing Time of My Life from Dirty Dancing, but that's a big if, and I will need a few drinks to get me to that stage where that seems like at the moment it's an okay idea. I need to seem absolutely certain it's the best idea I've ever had. I'm not quite there yet.
Now to see that, I really would.
Fantastic.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.